All right, so today we're going to be looking at law of cosines and using it to find a missing side of a triangle. So the way law of cosines works is that if you are giving two sides and the angle in between those sides, you can find the third side or the side that's opposite of that angle. So in this case, I have a triangle where the missing side is x. I have 9.1 and 8.7 as my two given sides, and the angle between them is 34.7 degrees. So I'm going to use law of cosine in order to find out what x is. Well, to set up law of cosines, first things first, what I would do is I would say, well, I don't know what this is, but I know that by law of cosines, x squared is equal to each of these other sides squared, added together, minus 2 times each of those sides times cosine of that angle. Okay? So x squared is equal to 9.1 squared plus 8.7 squared minus 2 times 9.1 times 8.7 times cosine of 34.7. All right, so what that means is that in the end, in order to find x squared, I will have to take the square root. So what I end up getting is that x equals the square root of 9.1 squared plus 8.7 squared minus 2 times 9.1 times 8.7 times cosine of 34.7. All of that's under the square root. Well, how did I know to take the square root? Remember when we were looking at algebra, in order to solve for the unknown, in order to solve for something being squared, you take the square root of it because the square root undoes the square. So we end up with x equals the square root of all of that. And so that is how we set up to solve for the unknown side. Now this we could just put in the calculator. The important part with this though is remembering that with law of cosines, the side you're looking for, in this instance the third side, would go here, we would square it, and it would be equal to the other two sides squared, added together, minus 2 times those two sides times cosine of the angle. That's where the cosine comes in for the law of cosines. So let's put this into the calculator and see what we get. So we end up with having the square root of 9.1 squared plus 8.7 squared minus 2 times 9.1 times 8.7 cosine of 34.7. And when I do that, I end up with x is approximately 5.3. And I'm rounding to here, two significant figures because it was two given to me from my given sides. Okay. Now, I want to show you some steps in between here because there are some mistakes that people make a lot of times when doing law of cosines. And it has nothing to do with understanding what law of cosine is. It all has to do with the arithmetic. And so I want to make sure that you don't make those mistakes. The most common mistake here is that people add before they square. So make sure that you do each part individually. So 9.1 squared, for instance, will give us 82.81. So 82.81 plus the 8.7 squared will give us 75.69. Okay, minus. Now notice this minus is minus all of this. That's another mistake people make. Sometimes people will just subtract the 2, or they'll just subtract 2 times 9.1 times 8.7. And they'll forget about the cosine. That all goes together. According to the order of operations, you would do exponents first, and then you would multiply. So we would multiply all of this. So this would be 2 times 9.1 times 8.7 times the cosine of 34.7. That is very important that you multiply all four of those parts. The two sides that are given, and the cosine of the given angle. Again, this is a common mistake that people make. They'll just do just this part and subtract it. we need the entire thing multiplied first. So in this case, we end up with 130.17827457. And remember, we're taking the square root of all of this once we finish it. Okay? Now from here, there aren't that many mistakes made, except that people will take the square root of just the first part, or they'll take the square root of each individual. We're to take the square root of the result we get once we add and subtract. The square root is the last piece of it because this was outside of the parentheses. Think of it as the square root has parentheses inside of it for you to do this stuff first, okay? All right, and then in this case, you end up with about 5.3. And so that's law of cosines and how you use it in order to get, when given two sides and the angle between them, finding the third side. So I'm going to end this video by showing you how to set that up for 3 different scenarios just to ensure that you can, okay? All right, so the scenarios that I'm going to come up with here, I'm just going to draw a triangle. Size doesn't really matter. And I'm going to call this side here, let's do B, and let's do A, and let's do E. Okay, so the side opposite of it, I'll do the lowercase letters. All right, so according to the law of cosines, what I would have is that, let's see what A would equal. A squared would equal, we'll take the two other sides, so E squared plus B squared minus the number 2 times those two sides, so E and B, or BE, cosine of the angle between them. Well, what angle is between E and A, or E and B? A is. Okay, so in order to find side A, I would take the square root of all of this, and I'll have my answer. Okay, well, how would we set this up to find B? Well, to find B, again, it would be B squared would equal to, well, what are the other two sides? E and A. So I could do E squared plus A squared minus 2 times AE or EA, whichever way you want to do that, cosine of, well, what's the angle in between them? Oh, that's angle B. Notice that it always has the same name as the side here. Okay? Well, lastly, let's see how you can find E. So E squared would be equal to, well, here's E. This would be the information we use to find E. So we have A squared plus B squared minus A squared plus B squared minus 2 times multiplying those two sides, AB, cosine of E, because that's the angle between them. That's the angle opposite of the side we're looking for. All right, and that's it every time. So if you get used to setting this up and then now plug in or substitute the given values in the correct spots, this will be very simple as long as you remember to follow order of operations and just to use the law of cosines. All right, that's it. So that's all you need in order to solve for a missing side of a triangle when given two sides and the angle in between them. If you are given two sides and angle between them, you now can use law of cosines. You then from there can use law of sines because you have all three sides. You can use law of sines to find the other two angles. You can also even use law of cosines to find the other angles, and we'll talk about that soon.